Hi guys, my name is Stephanie and I am back today with another video. Today we're going to be going over how to remove and replace the caulk on your bathroom vanity countertop. The caulk behind my husband's sink has been looking grungy and falling out for months now, so it's time to get this job off my to-do list. But no worries guys, this job is actually pretty easy. It took me about 10 minutes from start to finish for an area this size. I started by removing these handles just so that I could get them out of the way and get to that area behind the faucet better. But it's completely unnecessary. There are ways that you can get around it. And if you have an older faucet that might be held in place by a lot of corrosion, you probably don't even want to mess with it anyway. So only remove the faucets or the handles if you know for sure that you can get them off easily and put them back on. I decided to remove the caulk behind the bathroom sink with a utility knife. They do make caulk removing tools, but most of those caulk removing tools don't really go past the surface level when it comes to removing the caulk. And I needed to get all of the wet mildew covered caulk out from between the two surfaces here, the backsplash made from the countertop and the countertop itself. To remove the caulk behind the bathroom sink, you're going to want to cut away all of the caulk that's already in there. So the first thing I do is run that utility knife along the countertop to cut free the bottom of that caulk line. Then I hold the utility knife angled down while I cut across the top of that caulk line. Just be sure to be careful with the utility knife so that you don't scratch your countertop or your tile work or any woodwork that you have behind your bathroom sink. Once I've cut along the top and the bottom of that grout line, I then have to use my utility knife to sort of pick out all of the caulk that's inside there. So this is probably the part that takes the most amount of time, and it's the most frustrating part because it does take a while to get all of the caulk that's in between that joint or in that joint out of there. I end up going over the same area multiple times with the utility knife until I'm sure that I've gotten the majority of the caulk out of the joint. You want to remove that old caulking because it can be covered with water and mildew and create a problem with your new caulk. It can also leave little bits of the old caulk in your new caulk and you won't get a perfectly smooth, pretty line. After removing most of the old caulking with that utility knife, I move on to an old toothbrush. So I'm just going to scrub that opening between the two surfaces and make sure that I get out any of the little tiny bits of caulking residue that might still be left behind that the utility knife cannot get. After cleaning everything out with that old toothbrush, I move on to cleaning and prepping the surface with rubbing alcohol. So the rubbing alcohol is going to clean the surface and it's also going to remove any oils that's going to prevent the new caulking from sticking to your countertop. I clean about an inch below and above the new caulk line to be sure that that caulk is going to have a nice surface to stick to. After prepping the surface with rubbing alcohol, I moved on to using my blow dryer to dry out that open joint now between the countertop and the backsplash. Like I said before, I have been getting mildew back there, so I know moisture is a problem and I don't want to trap that behind the new caulking. So I'm using my blow dryer on a high heat setting, high air, high heat, to dry out that opening. And if you pay attention, you can see I'm actually blowing little bits of water out from inside of that opening. So this is critical. You want to make sure everything's dried out before you put new caulking down. If you do not have a blow dryer, try to find a fan, something similar, or at least leave it open and don't use that sink for a few days to try to let that dry out before you put new caulking in. After drying out that opening, I was ready to move on to taping and replacing the caulk behind my bathroom sink. You want that painter's tape as close to the gap as possible without actually covering up any of the opening. Don't be afraid to use smaller pieces of tape to get that line looking perfect. You want it to look really nice before you apply the caulking. This is going to last a while, so you want it to look right the first time you do it. Here's a closer look at the gap between my pieces of painter's tape. Don't be afraid again, like I said, to use multiple pieces of painter's tape. Go over different sections to make sure you've got your line looking nice and tight. Now we're ready to actually replace the caulk. So I'm using GE's Advanced Silicone. So you want to use 100% silicone caulking for this job. It comes in either white or clear. I think with white countertops, white always looks best. And for clear, you're probably gonna have to use it for most other colors. Whenever I'm cutting a new tube of caulking, I try to make sure that the opening is as small as possible. That way you're not gonna have huge amounts of gloppy caulk left behind that you're gonna have to try to clean up. And I also try to cut the tip at an angle. It just makes it easier to apply it with an angle cut. This caulking does have an inner seal in it, so I usually use a really long skinny screwdriver to poke and break that open. Here's a closer look at that caulking container so you know exactly what to buy at the store. Again, it's non-paintable, so you cannot use this on your trim. It's just for tile, countertops, bathtubs, toilets, surfaces like that, not for paintable areas. So for this job, you want to put enough caulking in to fill in that opening between the two pieces of painter's tape, but you don't want so much extra caulking left behind that it becomes too messy for you to clean up. So you'll get a feel for this as you're doing it if this is your first time. The main thing that you want to remember here is that this is going to dry within 30 minutes. So it's actually going to start drying within like 4 or 5 minutes of you putting it down. So you want to have it cleaned up and looking nice before it starts to dry. You want to work in small sections again, so just do a couple feet of the caulking, clean up that area, and move on to do the next couple of feet of the caulking. I ran that yellow rag under the faucet before I started working to make sure it was nice and wet. I need that wet rag so that when I am smoothing the caulk line with my finger is wet enough so that the caulk line looks really smooth, but also that caulking isn't sticking to my skin too much. And I use that rag for cleaning off all of that excess caulking after I've smoothed out the line. You can see here how the extra caulking is all over that painter's tape. So that painter's tape is working for us to prevent all of the caulking from being on your countertop so you don't have to clean it off later. Again, the professionals don't have to do things like this, but they do this every day. We're doing this like once a year, so we need all of the extra help we can get. After you've smoothed out the caulking in one area, if it looks like it's underfilled, don't be afraid to go back and do that area again with a little bit more caulk. Use a wet finger to smooth it out again and make sure it's looking really nice and pretty before you move on to another section. Again, it only took me about 4 or 5 minutes to apply all the caulking behind the bathroom sink. So I'm removing the tape right away. So I don't want that caulking to dry before I remove the tape. I'm going to carefully remove the tape. Make sure I don't get any of that leftover caulk that's on the tape anywhere. So I'm going to carefully remove it, not let it get all over the countertop while I'm doing it, and without messing up the line I just made in the caulking. After removing that painter's tape, I grab my wet rag again to wet my finger down and run it across that caulk one last time to make sure it looks perfectly smooth and professional before it starts to dry. I'm wiping my finger again on that wet rag every 5 to 6 inches to make sure I get any excess caulk onto the rag and it's not spread around on the countertop. I want to keep my nice, straight, clean line. So this caulking, like I said, dries in about 30 minutes. So here's a look at that new finished caulk line. As you can see, the lines are nice and crisp. The caulk lines are really small. They're not like the giant caulk lines that you see some people leave behind. While I was waiting for the caulk behind that sink to dry, I went ahead and did the caulk behind the other sink in my bathroom. And here's a look at the finished caulk line on that sink. Again, you want your nice, tight, thin caulk lines. You don't want your caulk to be a feature on your countertop. You want it to be sort of something you're not even thinking about or seeing, but you want it to fill in the gaps so that it's protected from mold and mildew growing in between those areas. All right, well, I hope this helped you guys. If you have any questions, as always, leave them in the comments below. I do try to answer them when I get a chance. All right, good luck with your project, guys.